now recording for everyone who's not watching synchronously. Welcome. Today's lecture is a little bit different. We're not going to be talking about anything technical. I don't think there's any code in any of the slides. I might be wrong for a couple of them, but even then, the code really isn't the point. But yeah, this lecture is a little bit different because we're going to be talking about how to get an internship, and we'll talk about why that's super important, but it's going to be a very different lecture. Okay, so let's talk about where we're at right now. We've done a bunch of different stuff with developer tools, with Bash, Git. We've done some debugging. We've talked about how do you ask things of Professor Google. We've done some CS stuff, so we did Python. We talked about how to make a REST API by building a backend. We've talked about HTML, CSS. We've talked about databases, regular expressions, and we're going to be talking about next week, I think, Rust, which is going to be our next big unit after the ML lecture on Thursday. But CS196 is not just about developer tools in computer science. It's about giving back to students and having more experienced students talk about some of our experiences. And so part of that is professional development. So with that, we have project experience. So we teach you how to build cool projects and how to basically build things that you can put on your resume. But we also have this lecture, which is about getting an internship, which is hopefully very helpful for you. I know it was when I was taking the class. So a lot of people ask this question: I want an internship so bad. How do I do it, right? And there's not really a one answer, but we're going to get there. So question number one is, why should you want an internship, right? And one of the big things is experience. It makes getting other jobs and internships easier, right? If you've done an internship with one company 1 year, then getting an internship at another company the next year will probably be easier. Another thing is knowledge. You're going to learn a lot, okay? You're basically doing a lot of hands-on things for 3 months straight. So it's basically a semester, except instead of doing theory and assignments, you're spending all of your time working on hands-on practical applications that are actually going to be used. And that's a very different experience. So you're going to learn a lot through that process. Money. This is a really big one. A lot of people really want money. And the best way to do that is to get an internship because they pay really well for computer science. Anywhere from $20 an hour to $70 an hour on the upper end. It really depends on where you're at and what kind of internships you're looking at, but that range is pretty much the bare minimum and the maximum that you can see. And you can use it to pay off debt, pay rent, tuition, invest for the future, whatever, it's money, right? So yeah, that's another really good reason. And then the most important one is return offers. Companies have internships not to pay you, not to get labor for cheap, not to do any of the fun stuff, but to figure out who they want to come back as a full-time hire in the future when you graduate. And the easiest way to do that is an internship. So return offers are really great for you because it means that there's a lot less uncertainty going into your upper level years and actually graduating. And they're great for the company because it allows them to determine who they're looking for and get a much more hands-on approach with getting interns, right? They can actually evaluate your performance over the course of 3 months. So, who am I, you may ask? Why am I an authoritative source to talk about internships? Why is this person who has just randomly started lecturing in 196, who you've definitely never met before, become qualified? Well, I'm Matt. I'm a CS plus economics major. I'm graduating in 2023. So that's about my major and all that. I could go into more, but we're not going to. I've been involved with CS196 since January of 2020 in various roles, so that's when I joined the staff. So I started off as a project manager, and then I've been the homework lead and now the instructor this semester. And so last summer, I worked as a software engineering intern at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Crane, Indiana. And yes, that does mean, believe it or not, freshman internships are possible. It is not this mythical thing that can never be done. It is definitely possible if you work hard at it. And then this summer, I'll be an iOS software engineering intern at Hollow App, and that'll be from May until August. So that's a little bit about me. I've had a little bit of experience going through the whole interview process and everything else, and we'll talk about how, yes, it only looks like 2 internships, but there's a lot more involved with the process than just these 2. All right, so now that you've gotten to know me, you know me, but that doesn't help you get an internship, right? So let's talk about getting an internship now. Who gets internships, you may ask? And depending on who you ask, you get different answers. But one answer that a lot of people like to say is only CS majors who come in with 5s on APCS exams, proficiency out of this, this, and this, and then had a high school CS internship. In case you can't tell by the tone of my voice, that is wrong. That is very elitist and not at all correct. Anyone who comes into any sort of contact with CS can get an internship if you work hard. So whether or not you've programmed before or you've come in with tons of experience and basically been exactly who I just described there, you can get an internship. You notice the asterisk there, as I said, if you work hard. Don't expect to apply to just one company and just kind of like show up to the interview in shorts and a t-shirt and just get a job, right? It's a little bit more work than that. But the point of this slide is to say that the elitism around basically who gets internships and who doesn't are completely just false, right? Anyone has a shot at it. It's just how hard you work at it. Step 0 to getting an internship. I know, shocking. We have step 0. We use CS numbering here. Is to not compare yourself with others. This sounds pretty basic, but people do it all the time. This is CS at Illinois. You will hear someone who works at Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Uber, Lyft, Microsoft, Airbnb. I could list 100 other companies. I won't, because I would literally just be lecturing about what companies people I know go to and so on and so forth for the entire hour. Point being, there are a lot of really talented people here, right? There are a lot of people who just got lucky, and it really depends. Maybe they did something that you aren't as interested in, and the company they interviewed for just happened to need someone who does that. And that's an example where it's just a little bit of luck involved as well. So don't compare yourself to others, because everyone is capable. And it's really frustrating if you're trying to interview somewhere and you get denied, but then your best friend gets an offer that you've been looking for, right? Like, don't worry. It is totally normal, and everyone can do it. It's just a little bit of luck involved as well. And it's also extremely, extremely unhealthy. It leads to very toxic relationships and everything else. So don't compare yourself to others. You should instead be collaborating with them. I mistimed my bullet points there. But if you feel behind on others, like if you feel behind other people, you're going to basically put them up on a pedestal where they don't actually belong, because they're just like you. They're struggling through their CS classes. They're doing whatever, right? Like, no one is inherently just going to be significantly ahead of you or behind you, unless it's just like a time difference where they've actually taken significantly more classes that you just couldn't have taken in the time that you've had yet. So don't be unnecessarily hard on yourself just because of what you see other people doing. But then there's the reverse. Don't feel like you're ahead of other people, and as a result, you should get a job, right? That's just as toxic. That's just as unhealthy. If you feel ahead, great. Don't suddenly stop working, right? You need to keep moving ahead, because otherwise, everyone who you think you're ahead of will catch up. And more importantly, you are going to think that you are the greatest, when in reality, someone who's working hard to continue improving is going to be more attractive to candidates or to interviewers. And so instead of comparing yourself to others, make sure that you're contributing to collaboration and not competition. Learn from each other, support each other, mock interview each other. Like, do not put yourself on a scale against someone else, right? Always keep in mind that there's luck involved with this process. So, you're an average of people you're around, and surround yourself with people who push you and encourage you, not the other way around. This is a really important one. If you have people that are telling you, oh yeah, I'm so much better than you, and I'm doing this, this, and this, right? That's not a good friend at that point. Like, that's someone who's just trying to talk themselves up because they feel insecure about where they're at. So instead, make sure that you're putting time into friends who are actually trying to help you and teach you as well as learn from you, right? That's a healthy relationship instead of just trying to put someone down. So you may have a little bit of confidence. And I've said this a couple of times. How are you going to get an internship? You haven't seen a way to get an internship yet. Well, that's what we're working on, all right? First off, you need confidence. So you can't put yourself on some other scale against someone else before you do any of these other steps. So let's talk about what the typical CS internship interview process looks like. And I'm going to point out that word typical is really important. I've seen people who've gotten offers after, in fact, I have gotten offers after like 2 interviews, and I've seen people who've had like 5, 6 interviews. It really depends, and it's unique to every person. So, getting the interview. This is a really important step, and that's the first step that you have to go on, getting the interview. Once you've gotten the interview, you're going to have to do a coding challenge. Then you're going to have a behavioral interview, and then a technical interview, and finally a final on-round on-site remote interview. That one's kind of complicated. We'll get there. And at the end, you'll have gotten the offer, hopefully. So this is basically the process that you're going to go through. You may have multiple technical interviews or anything else. It really just depends, and you'll have to sort of play it by ear based on each company. So step 1 is getting the interview. So there are a bunch of different ways to get into the process of getting an interview. And so some of them include applying online. Just spam it everywhere. Referrals, right? Talk to your friends, make connections with people, try and get a referral somewhere. The career fair, great way to get internships. Cold emailing recruiters, right? This one sometimes actually works. You don't think it would work, but if you just email people, sometimes they respond, and sometimes you'll get an interview from that. So let's talk about the first thing that I kind of wanted to mention before we talk about any of these, because this is, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do in this step. Regardless of how you're applying, make sure you're making connections with the recruiters and be memorable to them, right? Recruiters talk to thousands of people over the course of a year and won't remember most of them because a lot of people just come and go and they never see them again. If you can be memorable, that means the next time around you apply, even if you didn't get it the first time, you're going to be more likely to get it the next time because they remember you and they have a little bit more of a idea of where you've been and where you're going. So yeah, as I said, even if you don't get an interview this time or end up going somewhere else, recruiters are people too, and remember that and they remember the people that they liked, and also, more importantly, sometimes the people that they didn't like, right? So if you just ghost a recruiter, that reflects as bad on you as it does when a recruiter ghosts you, right? So keep that in mind, because as much as recruiters are just going to spam you at times, if you respond to them, it will generally work out better for you because they will remember you, you'll remember them, and you'll go off with a positive relationship, if not, at the very least, not a negative one. And so I actually, during one of the career fairs, got an interview for a job that didn't even exist. I just walked up to a recruiter who wasn't even looking for anyone to be a software engineer, and I just started talking to him and gave him my resume, and I started talking, and I mentioned something, and we started talking about that thing because apparently he knew the same thing or whatever. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically I just started talking with him. He wasn't even looking for a software engineer, and he said, you know what, let me give you an interview. And we connected, and I was able to get an interview just because I happened to talk and connect with a recruiter. And that's where luck comes in, right? It's not every day that you're going to get a recruiter who happens to like the same things as you or happens to have some random connection. And in those cases are going to be the cases where you just have to deal with the luck of the process. So let's talk about applying online. Spam, spam, spam every application you can, because the more applications you apply to, the more of a chance you have. Keep in mind that basically the chance that you have of getting an internship is relatively, plus or minus a few things, fixed, right? Or at least an interview, right? it's plus or minus a few things going to be fixed based on a bunch of different factors. So if you only have a 1% chance of getting an interview from one company, if you apply to hundreds of companies, eventually you're going to get an interview from one of them. Cover letters. I don't know. I've stopped bothering with it. The previous instructor stopped bothering with it. One perspective is that it makes you different from other applicants, right? It shows that you're very interested in that company. The other perspective, and the perspective that I've started to take, is that it's too much time, and usually most recruiters won't read it just because it's superfluous information that they can't just get from your resume or somewhere else. It's pretty much just saying, hey, I'm interested in the job, usually. So when it comes to cover letters, like, it isn't really worth the investment to do it right. And then if you do it wrong, it looks really bad because they can tell you're just copy pasting a resume or a cover letter that you've used somewhere else. So referrals. This is the most powerful way to get an interview. If you know someone at the company, you can pretty much get an interview by just having them vouch for you. And so it's very, very powerful, but of course it means that the person at the company has to be willing to refer you, and you have to know someone at that specific company, which is sometimes very hard to do. So one great way to do that is to ask friends and connections. And how do you make friends and connections? Create a LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is perfect for building connections and building your network and being able to set up a way to communicate with people who may work at a company that you want to work at, and you can start reaching out to them. Or you can post to your friends and be like, hey, does anyone know someone working here? I'd really like to work there, right? And so LinkedIn is a really great way to go about doing that. So this is a demo of a referral from the previous instructor. This was an email he received, and basically he was talking with a professor, and out of nowhere was basically asked, hey, do you know anyone who can work on machine translation, right? My group needs someone. And so this is the kind of referral where the previous instructor could basically have said, oh yeah, I know X or I know Y, right? And that person then would have a leg up in, at the very least, getting an interview. So, career fairs. Career fairs do work, believe it or not. This slide was not updated, but I've actually received an interview and an offer from the career fair, and that's how I got my freshman year internship. So it does definitely work. It does take a lot of energy, though. So some tips are checking companies attending on Handshake, look at what roles that they're basically putting out, and making a plan for who you want to see, right? Career fairs are long, and you only have so much time to see every single company. So instead, you have to basically prioritize on which companies you want to see and how quickly you want to go about seeing them. And that will basically determine how many companies you're able to see, and that plan is going to be really important in getting an offer. Go early. This was way more important back in the times where this was in person, but it still matters with the online version. Not many people are willing to wake up at 8 a.m. and put on career fair attire and go to the career fair at like 9 a.m. in the morning. It sounds crazy, but it's just a fact of life, right? A lot of college students are going to wake up later and go to the career fair in the afternoon. But if you go early, the lines are going to be shorter, you're going to be able to talk to more companies, and it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience. Also, have a quick pitch. Who are you? What work have you done? Why are you interested? Etc., right? Have some sort of elevator pitch that you can say in 60 seconds or less that will basically tell a recruiter, hey, here's what this student is, here's what they are good at, and here's why you may want to hire them, right? So quick pitches are definitely a really good way to introduce yourself to a recruiter, and you should generally have one going into a career fair. And cold emailing recruiters. This is essentially a last resort, right? This is going to be the least effective method out of all of them because sometimes the recruiter may not even have an opening, and even if they do, they get bombarded with emails all the time. So it's most of the time not going to work, right? You basically just send an email to recruiters talking about your experience, and there are a bunch of templates you can follow online. It's basically just hi, I am blank, I am a major in blank, graduating blank, and so on and so forth, right? You basically tell them who you are just like you would with an elevator pitch, except in email format. And don't expect a response. Most of the time, this isn't going to work. However, if you're lucky, you might actually get an interview from this, and that is pretty cool. So let's move on to the coding challenge. So what is a coding challenge? It's basically a way to weed people out before spending resources on actually interviewing you. So these companies pay for these sites where they'll give 1 to 3 coding problems that aren't proctored or anything, and the whole idea is basically to see how skilled you are at doing certain easy problems. And so there are a bunch of different platforms, but one of them is HackerRank, and that's going to be similar to the environment that you would use in PrairieLearn. So let's talk about the behavioral interview. Employers use this to determine, based on your past experience and to understand the way that you react in different situations. So some questions that you'll get, and these really never change, they're timeless. They'll be, tell me about a time when you did blank, or why do you want to work for us, or plenty of other things, and they're all pretty much the same. You'll find them on Google. If you just Google like behavioral interview questions, you'll probably find like a list of the top 60 or whatever. So how to prepare for a behavioral interview. There are a couple of different tips, but the biggest one is to prepare yourself for the most common questions, because those are the ones that you're most likely to get every time, because they're the ones that they're doing the interview for. So for at least 3 different projects that you've worked on, prepare some examples of challenges that you've faced, mistakes that you've made. What did you enjoy about those projects? Or examples where you took leadership in that project. And then if there's team conflict, how did you resolve it? How were you involved? All of that kind of stuff. So these are some of the most common types of questions that you'll get, and having a variety of different projects that you can refer to while answering these questions is really going to help your success when you're answering them. And, what would you do differently about that project? And finally, understand your project, right? Be able to discuss technical things, even though it's a behavioral interview. Sometimes going into the technicals will be helpful as long as you keep it relatively brief. Just make sure that you're actually talking about your project and not just some generic situation that you can make up off the top of your head, right? Because in that case, they'll know, you'll know, it just doesn't work out. You want to talk about real world situations. So, tips and tricks. Speak with confidence, right? If you sound confident, then you will be heard as confident. The interviewers will hear the way that you speak and will understand that you are speaking with meaning and with a correct tone to your answers. Another thing is talking about what you did and not what your team did, right? They're not hiring your entire team, they are hiring you. So if you talk about, oh, my team did this, my team did that, right? Then it sounds pretty much like you did nothing. So make sure that you use you instead of your team. And don't be arrogant. People really hate it when you just say, oh, and I did this, I did this, I did this, and just talking about what you did even though it was a team effort. So I know these 2 points kind of go hand in hand, but as I said, don't be too humble as well, right? Don't talk about just what your team did as a whole. Talk about what you did, and make sure not to make it sound like it was just the you show. Make sure that it's a combination of a team effort and also what you think you did really well on that project. So talk about some of the most impressive things you did and brag a little bit, but don't go on and say like, oh yeah, I did everything hard or anything like that, right? Because that just comes off as arrogant. Use the STAR structure. Situation, task, action, result. You see Eustace is over there. That's because he's a big fan of the STAR structure. So when I was making these slides, he even said, hey, did you put STAR in there? You should really put STAR in there. So here it is, STAR. Situation, task, action, result. This basically is a way to structure your responses so that you're going to be the most effective in responding. So first thing you want to do is describe the situation that you were in during the scenario that you're describing. Then you want to talk about the task, what you had to do. Then you want to talk about the action. What actions did you take to achieve the result, right? What happened because of your actions. And then finally, ask questions. Talk to the interviewer like you're a human, right? Don't just be like answering questions. Like, make sure that it's a conversation, and ask questions. Maybe talk a little bit about the company. Ask like about a specific research field. If you ask questions about the company, that shows you're interested in that company, right? Nobody wants to just be there and be like, oh yeah, no, I have no questions, right? If you seem interested, that's going to come off really well on you compared to others who aren't. And then finally, questions related to day to life, questions about research about the company, or questions about what they are working on within your specific area. Those are all great questions, right? So if you want to ask like, oh, what does a typical day look like, right? They'll kind of go through that with you, and you can kind of understand that and ask follow-ups, and that conversation is really good because then you're learning more and they're seeing that you're interested. And then finally, show that you're coachable, right? You are there to learn. You are an intern. You are not there to be a software engineer yet. You are there to learn and be a software engineer. So it's a dual purpose. If you show that you're able to learn from your mistakes, that goes really far for behavioral interviews. The next step, crushing the coding interview. So in this step, you're going to be interviewed by a technical member of the company, typically senior software engineers. You're going to be given a problem, sometimes more than one, and you'll need to do your best to solve it efficiently and correctly while explaining your thoughts and decisions throughout, right? You're going to be given some sort of problem, and they'll tell you, hey, how do I do this? And you need to come up with the best way to do it in the time that you have while also talking about what you do, right? You don't just want to sit there and code because nobody's going to know what's going on. So what kind of problems are we talking about? Well, that depends. LeetCode.com is an excellent database of problems because it will show you exact problems that have been asked in real technical interviews. And sometimes some interviewers will just go to LeetCode, they'll pick a random problem, and that's how they decide on their interview question. So LeetCode is a really great site to practice your interviews and determine what is going to be the best format for you to learn, or to learn interview questions. So let's look at a couple examples of LeetCode problems. So this is an easy problem. It's just to reverse a string. And so you're given an array, and then all you have to do is swap all of the letters, right? So with the first one, it changes the H to an O and an E to an L, and then the L stays in place, and then vice versa for the back half of the word, right? And you can kind of see that. So it's a really interesting, simple problem, and this is why this is marked easy. A more medium problem would be cheapest flights within K-stops. So this is a graph problem, and basically if you take data structures, which is CS196, you'll learn a lot more about how to deal with these types of problems. But basically, the idea is with this problem to go from one place to another place with only however many legs. So in this case, it gives a K of 1. So how do you get to that leg? And so on. So a cheapest flights within K stops is going to be a question that you might get. This is a medium question. This is something that you would probably look at after you've done something like CS196 and a couple other classes. And then maximal rectangle. This is a hard problem. Basically, it's given an array of a bunch of binary numbers. Find the largest rectangle with ones in it, right? So these are all different types of problems, and you'll see a spectrum there, right? You have super easy problems, you have super hard problems. So it's really just, it depends on the type of problem that you're looking for. All right, so you might be asking, this is dumb. I don't think I'll ever need to do this on the job. You're right. Why are you interviewing like this? Well, the thing is that even though you might not be doing this every day on the job, first off, you will do it sometimes, right? There are times that you will be working on algorithms like this, and they want to know how quickly and easily you can work on an algorithm and figure it out. And so part of it is simply a knowledge test. Do you know X, Y, and Z? But the other part is basically to differentiate between people who are able to pick up things fast and solve problems on their toes, or people who haven't really been able to develop that skill yet, because that is a really big determinant in how quickly and efficiently you can solve problems in the real world. So it's a skill independent of software engineering, and you can get better at it through practice and repetition. This is a big point, right? If you just go on LeetCode once a day and do one problem, you will eventually get to the point where you're solving those hard problems, no questions asked. You can just do it like it's nothing. If you put in the practice, you will get better at it just by purely repeating through your work. So, how do you get good at technical interviews? So get comfortable with the language that you want to use during the interviews, right? You can use whatever you want. I personally prefer using high-level languages, Python, Java, whatever, just because it simplifies my life. Python is really great because there's less syntactical sugar that you have to put everywhere. It's very clean, very quick, and you can generally write stuff very fast. And then you can use whatever you want, but as you can see, there's an asterisk there. Please don't choose some random language that has super weird syntax that nobody understands, right? Nobody wants to be that interviewer who's just sitting there like, when they have no idea what's going on because you've chosen like the one language that they have no idea and can't understand because it has no logical sense to it. And then practice. Eventually, you will develop the patterns and you'll see those patterns, and as you go through problems, you'll see, oh, this is this type of problem, and you'll be able to solve that type of problem. It goes from actually being about solving problems to learning what types of patterns there are in these questions, because all of the best questions will typically share certain patterns, and just learning how to solve that pattern and then applying it to that specific question. And then classes are going to be a big thing. As I mentioned, CS225 is really important for some of them. But other classes include CS374, which is algorithms, and CS241. And you can still get practice and get internships without these classes. They just really help in being able to understand the technical interview questions a little bit more. And the last thing is don't give up. It takes time to wrap your head around this whole thing. They aren't like the worst problems in the world once you get used to them. As you start like practicing, it just becomes second nature. It's just a skill that you have to put time into. So general approach to solving these problems. Understand what the question is saying, right? Sometimes this can take a second, especially when it's a more complex question. Try some examples, right? If you develop a couple of test cases and examples that you play out, then that might help trigger which pattern you know that you need to look for now. Think of a brute force solution, right? Think of like the bad solution that is most obvious off the top of your head and at least start getting something down so that you can always go back and fix it later. Looking for improvements to develop a better algorithm is also really important, right? Even if you get a solution, that doesn't mean you want to submit that solution, right? You don't want to say, okay, I finished in 5 minutes, I'm done, no more questions, right? What you want to do is say, okay, here's what I have, here's how much time I have left, how can I make this better? Okay, so that's a really important part of it. Then just code your idea, right? You now know what you need to implement. Now try and actually implement it. Then test your idea, right? Whether this be by writing actual unit tests or some sort of example test cases, just put something together that tests your code and maybe gives boundary cases so that way you're able to find more questionable things that you wouldn't have known the answers to. And if you look at testing your code like an adversary, if you were trying to break your own code, you're going to be more effective at testing. So look at testing your own code as trying to break someone else's code instead of trying to fix your own. And then analyze your idea. You'll learn about Big O runtime analysis, I think in CS225 or 125 a little bit towards the end, and then you really learn about it in CS173 and 225. Big O becomes very important. And it will really help analyze the solution you came up with. Tips and tricks. Try not to stay quiet. Think out loud. They want to hear from you, right? An interviewer doesn't want to just kind of sit there and watch like text appear on a screen or you just writing stuff on a whiteboard, right? That's not an engaging interviewer for the interviewer. They're just going to kind of space out eventually. What they want is to hear you talking and hear your thought process and learn more about you and why you're doing whatever you're doing. right? That's a much more interesting interview. Somebody put in chat, so choose Scratch for the languages. That would be pretty impressive, honestly, because Scratch is a little bit limiting, but if you want to use Scratch, go ahead. People would ask questions for sure. So, yeah, try not to stay quiet. Interviewers are there to help you, so ask them clarifying questions. They usually give you hints. Sometimes the mean ones don't. That's pretty sad, but most interviewers, if you get stuck, they'll give you hints. And then, more importantly, when you're initially trying to understand the problem, they will give you a way to look at the problem that's going to be, or they'll give you, like, if you give them an example input, they'll tell you, oh, hey, yeah, that will work, or that won't, or this is like this is the result for that function. And so you're able to ask questions to figure out edge cases. So think of this as a simulation of what it would be like working on the job, right? They want to see that you're coachable, going back to before with behavioral interviews, and capable of collaboration, right? Nobody wants to work with someone who's just going to sit there and type on a screen all day. What you want to be doing at a software engineering job is collaborating with others and making sure that everyone's on board and understanding your code as well as able to read it. So making sure that you're going through your thought process as you go is very important. And then you don't need to be perfect depending on the problem, right? Do your absolute best and don't give up, but you don't need to be perfect. Interviewers are usually trained to help you out if you're stuck. I actually had an interviewer where I had like one edge case that I had forgotten how to do with the data structure. And he just said, oh, that's fine. You can skip it. I understand, like, you got most of it, so we'll move on and just pretend you could have Googled it or whatever, right? So most interviewers will be pretty lenient about edge cases and that kind of thing. As long as you understand that you knew where you were going, you just needed a little bit of help. Or sometimes they'll even help you and show an example of like that collaboration that we were just talking about. So, step 4, putting it all together, right? This is the final stretch. This is your final round interview. You'll have a combination of more behaviorals, more interviewers, more technical interviews. It really depends on the company, right? You'll maybe sometimes have just a behavioral interview. That's typically for like freshman internships. And then other times you'll have like 5, 6 interviews. It really just depends on the company. So, some companies will fly you out, put you in an awesome hotel room, and treat you like royalty, right? This was before everything went online, etc. But before all that happened, they would bring you to their office, show you around, and kind of have you be there, right? And that's part of the final round interviewers. Some companies, though, even before COVID, would just do it over Skype, right? It's easier for them, it's cheaper for them, it still works. It's just not as good. So Skype interviewers or interviews for final rounds are still possible. It really just depends. And then some technical interviews will actually be over whiteboard. So whether that be them flying you out or them coming down to Champaign, it really depends. But you'll basically be standing at a whiteboard and actually writing code out instead of typing it on a computer, which, keep in mind, can be very daunting. You want to make sure that like syntactic stuff you're getting right, stuff that usually an IDE would kind of help you out with. That stuff you don't have anymore on a whiteboard. So if you're doing something on a whiteboard for an interview, make sure that you're just keeping an eye on yourself and not missing anything important. So now you got an offer, right? Awesome job. Congrats. If you accept, you're locked in, unless you're an egg, which just don't do it. I've heard really bad horror stories of people who do that, and then the original company that, or the original company that they accepted then tells the new company that they were trying to swap to, and then their offer gets pulled. So just don't do it, because it ends really badly for you in 9 out of 10 situations, and in that 10th situation, it really isn't much better for you, right? So you really just don't do it. If you're in the process of looking elsewhere, right, and you have an offer but you want to wait out, usually you can actually tell other companies that are interviewing you or whatever, hey, I have this offer, here's the deadline, can we speed up this interview process so that I can make a decision about your company as well as that company, and basically make sure that all of your options are on the table before you make a decision. And so that will really help out with the interviewing process, because that way you're able to sort of level the playing field and also generate more interest from other recruiters who may have waited a couple months to interview you. Make sure to stay humble, right? Just because you got an offer doesn't mean everyone else did. So don't go like walking around thinking that like you're royalty now and saying that like, oh yeah, I have an internship, right? That's not what it's about, right? Like, yes, you have an internship, but don't be that person. Sometimes you're going to hear bad news. Uh-oh, you got rejected. Okay? Fun story time. I legitimately had that happen at the end of a very long day, and I'm like, well, that didn't go well. And I literally just passed out right after that because it was probably like midnight around that time. So rejections happen. You'll always get them at weird times, and it's not a fun experience ever. But rejection is normal. You will get rejected from places. You will get rejected from more places than you get accepted. Rejection is a part of the process. Since freshman year, I've been rejected from internships so many times that I can't even count, right? I don't even know how many internships I've applied to, but I've been rejected from most of them. And I've only had a handful of offers, less than the amount I could count on my fingers in terms of offers to show for all of that rejection. So it's a side of things that most people don't talk about because they just don't want to talk about failure. But failure is part of the process, right? Rejection happens. Part of it, as I said at the beginning, is all about luck. So if you get rejected, don't worry. Be very gracious and move on. Keep on trying. One opportunity will come. The more opportunities you give, the better it will be. And then also, if you get an email rejection, then just be respectful and respond and basically say thank you for the opportunity, and just kind of stay in touch with that recruiter so that you have a better shot next time. Remember, the more memorable you are to a recruiter, the more likely you are to get an internship, or at the very least an interview the next time around. So there are a couple types of rejection. I'm just going to go over them pretty quickly. Resume rejection is basically where you either input it into the system or somewhere else and it's just gone in the wind. It went somewhere and you maybe never heard back, or they'll say, oh, sorry, we're not taking you because of your resume or whatever, right? Then you'll get rejection after an interview. You'll probably get like an email from a recruiter basically saying, hey, we're very sorry, but we've decided to move on with other candidates and not you. Please apply next year or whatever, right? That's generally a pretty common one. Another one that really sucks is just getting ghosted. Sometimes you'll do an interview and then a company will disappear off the face of the earth, right? They'll just poof. Or even worse, sometimes you'll apply for a position and you're either still you're still working through the interview process or something else, and all of the spots for that year are already filled up. And at that point, they'll just say, hey, we don't have any more spots, so unfortunately we're going to have to let you go, or not take you on as an intern this year, maybe next year, because you're probably a qualified candidate. So it really depends on the type of rejection, but there are a lot of different types. Things you should know about. The biggest ones are freshman and sophomore programs. So Google's STEP program, I think Google has a second one. No, they split the freshman and sophomore one, but it's still under STEP. Facebook and University, Microsoft Explorer. There are all kinds of different programs for freshmen and sophomores that will work out for you because they're generally targeting those groups who have less experience than, say, juniors or seniors. Research Park. This is really, really big. Research Park is a massive area just south of campus, and it has so many companies. You can click on that list later, and you will find like a bunch of them. And the only people usually applying to those positions are U of I students. And most of the recruiters there know not to ask technical interview questions because a lot of sophomores and freshmen will apply. So it's generally a more accepting environment than some of the other places, and you get to be in Champaign as well, at least before everything went online once again. So I went down to Research Park the other week, and I took a couple of photos. So some of the companies that we have down there: NVIDIA, Yahoo, a bunch of others I'm not going to list aside from John Deere. I think we have like Caterpillar, we have Capital One. We have so many that I could probably have taken like 100 photos down there. But yeah, there are all kinds of different companies. So, yeah, Research Park, really great resource. You should totally apply to those positions if you can. But there's more than just summer internships. You can have a semester where you just go take time off to do a co-op or to go do an internship or do something like a remote internship while you're at school, right? Especially right now, it's a little bit easier because you can just do remote work and do remote school, so it really works out. So there's more than just doing a traditional summer internship if you have time or if you're willing to put in the work. All right, miscellaneous resume tips. I think we're about to reach the end. Yeah, okay. So, miscellaneous resume tips. Put your GPA if it's above a 3.0. Below a 3.0, it's probably not wise because at that point it looks a little bit not great on you. But if it's above a 3.0, definitely put it down somewhere and try to bold it or do something so that it stands out. Put your end graduation date instead of start date, right? If you say I started in 2018, then everyone is going to be like, oh, well, when do they end? 2022, 2021, whatever, right? And so you kind of need to figure that part out. But if you put the graduation date instead of the start date, every recruiter will be like, oh, this person graduating in 2023 or 2022, right? It really helps the recruiter not have to do that guesswork. And then the final thing is if you don't have experience, get some, right? Projects are a really great way to get experience. No internship required. If you go into the announcements channel right now, you'll see a friendly PSA from Eustace about Hack Illinois for 2021. It's a really big hackathon. It's the premier one for U of I. If you want to put together a project, go do Hack Illinois. It's going to be really, really helpful for you. As well as this class, right? You're working on a project right now. That's going to be a really great experience that you get to put on your resume, show on your GitHub, put everywhere, right? These projects are useful and are useful for internships and getting these internships. Another thing is research, right? Research, yeah, it can be used like for grad school and everything else like to move towards grad school, but it's also really impressive as a recruiter if you see someone did research on something, right? If you're published in something, that's really impressive to a recruiter. So if you want to do research, go do it and then make sure to put it on your resume. But the most important thing is just do something, right? If you don't have experience and you want an internship, go out there and do something to get one. Don't just sit there and expect an internship to come to you. That's the most important thing about this entire process is that there are no jobs just reserved for you out of college. You have to go and get it. So that is it in terms of the official lecture. We still have a couple minutes, so I'm going to stop the recording.